There you go. Our evolution notes look like that. And if you're at home, they're in Google Drive. And I think, well, it'll be under notes. And then I think it's called like Unit 6 Evolution and Ecology. All right. Let's see. This is second period. So we had talked about related to versus descended from. Okay, I got to see that's a periodic table. Band texting. Nice. I'm not in band, so I know I don't get them all, but I still appreciate it. Cool. Um, all right. So what we had looked at last time with evolution is we had me, my brother, my cousin, my friend, and we said that I'm descendant from my parents, but I'm related to my brother. I'm a descendant of my grandparents. I'm related to my cousin. I'm a descendant from whatever this is. Yeah, Bob. And but I'm related to my friend. And then we think that maybe 6 or 7 million years ago we share a common ancestor with chimps. And the reason we think that, well, we'll be looking at other reasons, but at this moment, one of the reasons we think that is because a human and a chimp are about 98, maybe 98.5% genetically identical to each other. And so scientists never said that we evolved from chimps. They're saying that we're related to chimps. So that was the thing that we were kind of looking at last time. So in this unit, we spend a good amount of time on like kind of like evidence for evolution, like, hey, I get that that's some evidence, but like, do you have more? That kind of thing. Almost like we're building a case in court or something like that. So we spend a lot of time on evidence for evolution. We spend some time on stuff like this. So you got this picture up here. Does anybody own a Chihuahua? Yep, you have four. Wow, that is a lot. So you have four. Who has one? You have one? You have one. Do you happen to know how much they weigh, or maybe about like, are any of them over 10 pounds, or are they all under 10? They're all less than 10. Do you know? Okay, so maybe 10. Okay, or if you had a fatty, maybe it'd be like 12 or something like that. So, does anybody facts? He doesn't know. His Chihuahua's self-esteem is certainly intact. Um, but anyway, Great Dane. Does anybody own a Great Dane, or maybe you did in the past? Have any of y'all ever seen a Great Dane in person? Maybe you have a friend that owns a Great Dane or something. They're quite massive, aren't they? My friend Jay, he's one of the fellas. Four friends that I grew up with that I still hang out with. We're actually getting together over spring break to go fishing, deep sea fishing, which is great, except I will barf the whole time. So that's what happened last time. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. But anyway, so we'll do that. But my friend Jay, their family likes big dogs, so he had a Great Dane, and it was a female. And his Great Dane, I'm 5'11", and his Great Dane could put its paws on my shoulders while I was standing there and just like look at me like that. He now has a Mastiff, Daisy. Daisy's a super cool dog. I'm kind of a dog person, so I like all dogs. There's another Chihuahua. Can't even survive without a sweater. And that is a Mastiff. Now, at first, you're like, that has to be photoshopped. But how many of y'all have seen a Mastiff in real life? It's not photoshopped, is it? It's not. I don't know these people. This is just Google Images. So here's some dude. I'm assuming he's like an average size male. I can't tell. But here he is. He's actually sitting on the ground. And then less than a year later, so about 10 months later, he's now on the couch. Mastiff males generally, not some of them, but generally exceed 200 pounds. My wife worked at a vet clinic for a little while, and she's like, "Oh yeah, we have mastiffs that are like 240." So that dog looks like its owner to me. I don't know, just something about the lips. It just kind of like if I was trying to imitate what that dog would look like, it'd be kind of like, you know. This one, you know how with cell phones, especially, how like if I was standing like this and you took kind of a close-up picture, sometimes it sort of distorts and my arm looks like longer or something like that. Like the 3D effect on phones is sometimes exaggerated. So that might be happening a little bit on this picture, but check out this one. So my point is this, that's a Mastiff, and that's a Chihuahua and a Great Dane. Are they all three the same species? Yes. How do we know for sure that they're all the same species? Because they can breed and have kids, and their kids can have kids, and their kids can have kids, and their kids can have kids. Now, imagine that all the dogs had been extinct for hundreds of thousands of years, and we found a skeleton of this, and we found a skeleton of this. We can look at skeletons, you have growth plates. So based on what your growth plates look like, if that doesn't mean anything to you, don't worry about it. But based off of what your growth plates look like, we can determine are you an adult or not. So your growth plates close as you become an adult. If we took x-rays of you guys, a lot of your growth plates would be closed. And that means that you're not getting, those bones aren't getting any longer. Sometime around age 17, 18, 20, 21, your growth plates close. When you're 14, if we gave you human growth hormone, your growth plates are open. So you get taller and taller and taller and taller. But at some age, like me, if I take human growth hormone, I don't get taller because my growth plates are closed. So we could look at their bones and say, like, oh, yeah, his growth plates are closed. And oh, yeah, his are closed. So they're adults. Would we have thought that and that were the same species if we just had their skeleton and like no DNA evidence or anything? We probably would not. Meanwhile, you get into like Darwin's finches. A tree finch, a cactus finch, a ground finch, and a woodpecker finch are all different species. Now, you know, and I know it's like, well, their beaks are different. And I'm like, your beak's different. You know what I mean? Like your nose looks a little bit different than mine just because we're not all identical. I mean, a couple of us are, but just because we're not all identical doesn't mean that we aren't related. Males versus females is the kind of brown versus the black coloring. Just like cardinals, you know how like the male cardinals are bright red, cardinal birds, and the females are kind of more of a tan color. Um, so yeah, their beaks are a little bit different, but like I wouldn't have thought that like that thing and that thing were a different species. Like, oh yeah, those are different species. However, you know, this thing and this thing, same species. So even though it's unlikely that they would mate, if this one was the female and that one was the male, they might be able to do it. If this one was the male and that one was a female, she might not survive the act. And if she did, she would then have to give birth to a half Great Dane, right? Like, can you imagine a Chihuahua? What are you giving birth to? A half Great Dane. It's like, I don't know how big a full Great Dane puppy is when they're born, but I bet it's big, you know? So anyway, so it's actually possible. So when you get into like what's a species, it sometimes gets really tricky, really tough to figure out like what the difference is. If the things are still alive, we can see if we can get them to mate. And even if they don't like each other, we could like take sperm and eggs and mix them in a test tube and see if it would work. But when they're extinct, we don't really know. I can't take like bones from this fossil and bones from this fossil and kind of like, and see if they make babies. So I just kind of guess. And so that's why sometimes you'll hear scientists arguing, is this particular creature the same species as this other creature? Or we have new evidence, and now we think that this thing that we used to call a dog is not a dog. Now we think it's a wolf or whatever. So let's see. Got a few. Somebody else has a dog named Daisy. There's a question, kind of an offshoot, but I brought it up. Doesn't human growth hormone increase chances of cancer? Any sort of growth hormones increases chances of cancer because cancer is cells growing. Um, have you ever heard people say that once they got, I'm trying to think of where I've heard this. One of the ways of treating cancer is to starve it. And so, like, you eat less food. Well, one of the arguments is like, hey, like cancer cells growing. If you only eat 1,000 calories a day, your cells aren't growing. In fact, you're like losing weight, you're losing cells. So there's some logic in there, but at the same time, it's also like, well, yeah, but you're starving yourself, so that's bad too. So yes, growth hormones of any kind could, in theory, they don't have to, but they could, in theory, increase your odds of cancer. Um, Sometimes there are studies that will go and find one specific nutrient and they'll give it to cells and they'll be like, look, it's growing. It's like, well, you're feeding it. So I'll have cells in a petri dish and it's like, look, if I feed it sugar, that cancer grows. It's like, yes, yes. If you feed anything, it will grow. If you cut its calories, it will grow less, right? So sometimes they'll be like, look, that's proof that sugar causes cancer. And you're like, well, that could just mean that calories feeds the cancer. Now, it could be that sugar causes cancer. I don't know. But depending on how you do the experiment, I could go and I could add this and all of a sudden this cancer grows. Then I take it away and the cancer shrinks. It's like, well, if I give these cells 0 calories, then of course they're not going to divide and become billions of cells and 2 billion and 4 billion. So yeah, kind of interesting. Um, okay, so what we want to look at next though is this idea called Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. We'll get to see that later too, right there. So many interesting things in this unit that we'll get to learn about. Okay, so I need to kind of refocus or I'll just start talking about a bunch of random crap all day. Okay, so there was this person, lights are coming on, named Hardy, and another person named Weinberg. And there is some math involved with Hardy-Weinberg, but it's easy math. Like chi-square is definitely more difficult math. Hardy-Weinberg math is math. Let's see. I've only taught like two of you guys in the past. Do you guys remember? Did we learn Hardy-Weinberg in your ninth grade class, or did we learn chi-square? Chi-square. Okay, so I kind of rotate. One year I'll do chi-square with them. One year I'll do Hardy-Weinberg. So this year they get nothing because of COVID. We're sort of short on time. But in the past, like I even taught Hardy-Weinberg to my ninth graders. Or chi-square. They got one or the other. So Hardy-Weinberg. There's this idea called Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. And at first, you'll have to hang with me because at first you're like, this is dumb. But hang with me, it does get good, and I have a bunch of interesting stuff that relates to it. So this is one of those things that there's like a little bit of groundwork where you're like, this sucks, this sucks. And then I promise I'll make it good. So Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. Probably not a good intro. This is gonna suck, but it gets better. So it doesn't suck for very long, I promise. So independently, there's a person named Hardy, and there's a person named Weinberg. They were not working together. And Hardy-Weinberg, yeah. And they both came to the same conclusion at the same time, and we don't know who came to that conclusion first. In modern times with the internet, it's easy to timestamp stuff. But say back in the day, I don't even remember how long ago this was, but it's like 100 years ago or something. They came up with this idea about evolution. This guy came up with this idea about evolution, and it was the same. So we just kind of credited both of them at the same time with like the discovery of Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. And here's what it says. If you're in Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium, then here we go. If I look at gene frequencies, like allele frequencies, like that blue line right there is capital A. Like for eye color or something, I might be big A or little a. So if I look at all the letter A's in a population, maybe I have half of them are big A's, half are little A's. If I'm in Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium, they stay the same forever. So from generation 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, I was in Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. Then I fell out of equilibrium. So what they're saying is, let's say that we were looking at like something a little bit more relatable. Let's say I was looking at blood types. And I could have like the big A allele, the big B allele, or the little O allele. And let's say in the United States population, I don't know, maybe 40% of the alleles are O, maybe 25% are B. So that means I guess it has to be 35% is left over for A. All right. According to Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium, if the US population is in Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium for blood types, then that means if we came back 1,000 years later, they would still be the same. They'd still be 35%, 25%, and 40%. You're like, okay, I'll accept that. Keep going. Now, in order to be in Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium, they've determined that you only have to meet these 5 major requirements. There's a little bit of debate about a possible 6th one, but all scientists agree on these 5. So, on the AP Bio test, every year they ask about Hardy-Weinberg. And it comes down to if you meet these 5 requirements, the population should be staying the same. The amount of A and B and O alleles will be the same. So the first thing is you need a large population. And if you're following along in your notes, these are listed on the top of the very first page of your notes right there. So we kind of list them here, and then we go into more detail on them down here, like 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And I'll make sure that I kind of go in the correct order. So we need a large population. Okay, cool. The rest of them are all no's. So next up is no migration the second one? Okay. So next up is no migration. That kind of makes sense. If I'm looking at the US and I've got a certain percentage of people that are these different alleles, if people start like coming and going, then that's going to screw up the head count, isn't it? Right? If we've got a certain gene pool in here and all of a sudden 10 students leave and 10 come in, then like that changed the gene pool. So that makes sense. No migration. Next up is no selection. No mutation is next. By the way, the order doesn't matter. I'm just trying to go in the same order as your notes. But if you were talking about it, the order doesn't actually matter. No mutations. All right. Next up, no natural or artificial selection. Suspicious. And then lastly, no selective mating. And like I said, hang with me as we start to flesh these out a little bit and we give examples. I have some really interesting examples, especially on selective mating. Okay, so let's look at this. Is it possible to have a large population of some species? Sure. You're like, I don't know how large is a million or a billion or a trillion, but like, let's say it's trillions. E. coli. I bet between just our intestines in this room, I bet we're pushing a trillion E. coli. Then you start considering like, I know, good job. Then you start considering something like all of Timber Creek or all of Keller, or all the US. So we can have populations of trillions. So this is doable. No migration. Maybe we could get close to no migration. If I'm some sort of land animal that can't fly or swim, and I'm like born on the continent of Australia, it's possible that like we never leave, right? Kangaroos are pretty much exclusive to Australia. You know, Tasmanian devils, koalas, there's a whole lot of things that are basically stuck in Australia other than like zoos and stuff. So naturally, without human intervention, I could see how no migration could be, if not possible, like really, really close to possible. So, all right, I can play along with that one. No mutation. What are the odds that my DNA polymerase, when it's copying DNA, doesn't make any errors?
Near zero.
Yeah, near zero. I mean, we've calculated it makes an error 1 out of a billion times. So every time my cells divide, I pick up 3 errors. What's the likelihood that there's no mutations happening in this room as our cells divide? Like, you start getting into like winning the lottery like every single year, every single time, and you only play once. Like the odds become impossible, essentially. So that's kind of weird because we've sort of implied that mutation just sort of always happens. No natural selection. Isn't that like one of the cornerstones of biology? So don't we say that nature always selects? Like COVID-19, some of us, we get a little bit of a headache and that's it. Some of us, we get sick and 6 months later, we're still sick. Some people are 45, they get it and they die. Like, we don't know why, but nature is selecting against this guy and selecting for this guy. So we'll kind of put, maybe I'll do this. That's okay, question mark, question mark. By the way, what is artificial selection?
See, it would assume it'd be like selective mating, but it wouldn't be then. So it'd be some sort of like self-imposed.
Yeah, so you're right. It could be selective mating could be an example. It just means that nature's not doing the picking. Usually it's man that is. So kind of like back to our dogs. Why do all Great Danes look like Great Danes? Because we force them to mate with their cousins. And so when they do, they look the same. Like, hey, there's a golden retriever. Why does he look like that golden retriever? Because they're like second cousins. That's why all purebred dogs, we call them purebred, because you'll pay an extra $200. But another word we could call it is inbred, right?
Now, wouldn't that be selective mating though?
Yes, it is, but it's artificial selective. So we are choosing. This is when the animals choose. So like, so for example, a peacock, you know, the males have the giant tail feathers and stuff. That's the females like out in nature that's selecting. So I should say this would be no selective mating out in nature if I was going to make that better. Yeah.
Are choosing things.
Yeah. So it's like happening naturally, whereas artificial is like we're in a lab. Artificial selection. If I'm born with, let's say I get sick when I'm 6, maybe my appendix ruptures. Well, out of nature, I would just die. But because of artificial selection, I just have surgery. So man does a whole lot of artificial selecting.
Could artificial selection also be like hunting? Like if humans like go hunting and they only like when
That's
animals
true.
this way, they get like the fatter animals or whatever.
Yeah, we would.
Skinny ones survive.
Yeah, we would have an impact as a hunter if basically I'm, you know, like I've heard that turkey are kind of intelligent, like hard to hunt anyway. I've never hunted turkey, but they're supposed to be like pretty smart. Like I guess they go and they'll like do something and like loop back and crap. Like if you're trying to track something, they like play tricks on you. Again, I might have that kind of wrong. But so it's possible that just turkeys, even if they don't know what they're doing, they just, I'm going to go this way and then I'm going to backtrack and then like loop around if I feel like I'm in danger. They might not know why they're doing it, but those that do are less likely to get shot. And so now we just shoot the dumb ones. So yeah, so artificial selection is also like hunting. Yeah. Okay, and the last one, no selective mating. So out of nature, not us selecting, that'd be artificial selection, but how do they select each other? So is it possible that an animal or a plant doesn't do selective mating? Can you think of examples? So a lot of animals select, right? That's why a lot of, you know, if you're an elk or deer or whatever, they have like these out of control racks. Like that doesn't help when you're running through the forest. I'm sure it's a pain in the neck. So, I mean, but that's what the ladies like. So, can you think of examples where there isn't selective mating?
Plants.
Yeah, if I'm a plant, if the wind's blowing from the north versus the south, then my pollen flies one way and fertilizes these flowers, or it flies the other way and fertilizes these other flowers. So I can think of some examples with no selective mating. So it's kind of like, all right, possible, possible, I don't know, and then possible. So overall, is Hardy-Weinberg, does it even seem possible? I mean, again, it might be like 1 in trillions of odds, but does it seem really possible at all? So, so here's this idea. We're going to learn all this. Does that ever happen? No. You know, it's almost like if we had a day of math, we're like, pretend that 5 plus 5 was 17. And we do all this math, and you're like, is this real? And we're like, no. Okay, what am I doing here? So here's why we try to figure out Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. It isn't possible. So the general rule is, unless you're in a lab setting where we could somehow control this, then and even that would be sort of hard to control. And then we'd be doing artificial selection. But it's going to be near impossible to have Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. So here's why we actually do it. So this is how I promised you it would actually get, the next part gets a little bit interesting, and then the part after that gets the most interesting. So let's say that I was looking at some alleles. So maybe 70% of the population is big A, 30% of the alleles in the population are little a, and that's in like the year 2000. We come back and we check in the year 2020. So our data's in, and big A is now 0.60. So little a is 0.40. So is the 2000 population in equilibrium with 2020? No, it changed. If it was 70-30, 70-30, we would say they are in Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. Okay, so now there was a 10% swing up here. We went from 70% to 60%. So now let's see if we can figure out the cause of that. Are we okay or even pretty good at estimating population sizes? Or at least do we think we are? Like we'll even put animals on an endangered species list because we're confident that there's only 10 or 15,000 of them left, right? So we're decent at estimating populations. You can go to, it's literally called World O Meters. They have tons and tons of graphs of all kinds of human population graphs. And they also track all the COVID stuff. So they have 2 pages running now. Super impressive. Like the different things that they compare is like, it's insane. Okay, so we can estimate how big a population is. So maybe with this population, we're like, all right, there was a 10% change. All right, I estimate the population wasn't quite big enough. So I think the fact that the population was just a little bit too small, that might be responsible for like 1% of that 10% change. Okay, migration. You ever seen some sort of nature show where they put a tag on like an eagle or whatever and they check where it migrates and where it goes and then it comes back and stuff like that? So we can monitor migration rates. We're like, all right, we've looked at how much these particular things migrate, and we think that that could be responsible for about 1.5% of this 10% change. There is some migration, and we've calculated for that. Mutation rates, we can calculate those. Maybe that's 0.5%. Selective mating, maybe they're a little bit selective. You know, some are more selective, some less so. You have friends like that. Number 4, nobody liked that joke. All right, I thought that was funny. Number 4 is what's left over. So if this is true, if these really are the only 5 things, or essentially the only 5 things, then now we can come up with a number for this. So I know there's a 10% change. 1, 2.5, 3, 4% of it is due to this other stuff. So that means we think about 6% of the change is due to natural selection. That's why Hardy-Weinberg is useful. It helps us put a number on how fast is natural selection happening. The faster natural selection happens, the faster evolution happens. You're like, all right, I guess I see the use. Still not overly interested, Mr. Cotton. I feel like you're lying to me. Well, here's why it's useful. Take chicken pox. Let's say that chicken pox looks like this. Now, you guys grew up in a time where there was a chicken pox vaccine. Varicella is the name of the vaccine. When I grew up, there was no chicken pox vaccine. They were working on it. Chicken pox is rarely lethal. It can be, but it's rarely lethal. So it was kind of like bottom tier as far as like, let's get a vaccine for this. But it's highly contagious. So with my generation, pretty much everybody got chicken pox by the time they were about 6. If you didn't get it before school, as soon as you hit preschool or kindergarten, you would get it. Missed school for a few days, probably wasn't too big of a deal. So I got chicken pox when I was like 3 or 4 or something. So that was right around 1980. I was born in 76. I'm a bicentennial baby. So that's 1980. Have I had chicken pox since then? No, it's been 40 years plus, and I haven't had chicken pox again. Now, it could be dormant in my system somewhere, but my immune system recognizes it well enough that it keeps knocking it down. So this is what chickenpox looks like in 1980. And if it changed at all, maybe it changed a little bit. It's still similar enough that my immune system recognizes it and can defend against it. So I've built up immunity against chickenpox. I have antibodies against chickenpox. And so for the last 40 years, it's been changing so slowly that my body still recognizes it. So it's changing very slowly. It's evolving, like slowly. It's been 40 years. Flu. Let's say the flu looks like this. And let's say that that was the flu of 2018. All right, let's say I got the flu in 2018. Can I get the flu in 2019? Yes. Why is that? I had the chickenpox in 1980 and I'm still good. Why isn't it that I got the flu back in 1980 and I'm still good?
Because the flu changes.
Yep, the flu changes. Chickenpox might be changing, but it's super slow. Flu changes quickly. So it changes about every year. So pretty much every year, if I want to avoid the flu, I'm going to need like a new flu vaccine. Might not be perfect, but like there's a new flu vaccine every year. The chickenpox vaccine is the same. Like the chickenpox vaccine that you got is the same one they're giving my kid when he's born. Flu is different every year, right? So it's evolving quicker. So in 2018, it looks like that. And then in 2019, it looks like this. And then in 2020, it looks like this. And it changes enough that my immune system doesn't recognize it, so I get sick again. So we would say that's, let's see, chickenpox is slow, so I guess this is fast. HIV. Let's say HIV looks like this. Do we have a vaccine for HIV yet? Nope. We've been working on an HIV vaccine for almost 40 years. HIV was officially named and sort of like credited with being like we understood it in about 1981-ish. Okay, cool. So HIV. How fast does HIV evolve? Four decades, still the same. This is new every year. HIV is new to my immune system every 3 to 4 weeks. So that's slow. That's fast. I guess this is like fast plus, super fast plus. I'm down with that. Now, are there other viruses in the world? Are there tons of different bacteria in the world? So is my classification system of slow, fast, super fast plus going to fall apart pretty soon when I have like 10,000 things that I'm ranking? This one's slow. This one's slow plus. This is fast, medium, minus. So at some point, don't I just want like a freaking number? Yeah. And so that's why we have Hardy-Weinberg. We can now put a number to how fast is natural selection happening, which should determine how fast something is evolving. And why would I care about how fast something is evolving? Because of COVID-19. Is this vaccine going to last 3 months, or am I going to be good to go for 2 years? It all depends. We don't know right now, but it all depends. HIV, how are we eventually going to have a vaccine for HIV? If I can find something unique to HIV that doesn't change, then I could have a vaccine, and it might last for years. But right now, all the stuff that we're creating vaccines for keeps changing. So if I can find something that doesn't change, I could make a vaccine. So eventually we probably will. And HIV, we'll find something that doesn't change very fast, and we'll have some vaccine that holds it down for 5 years or 10. Did you have your hand up, Travis?
Yes. I was wondering what was the sixth thing? You said there was something that they argue over?
I'd have to look it up, but like it's been a few years since I've looked at it. So great question. I can't quite recall. But there was like there was like a sixth thing, I think. I don't think there was like a seventh. I think there's one extra thing where some scientists are like, yeah, there could be this other thing too. And other scientists are like, yeah, that's insignificant. But I don't recall what it was. So very good question, especially since I brought it up, but I can't recall. So that's why it's useful. Okay, so now let's go and look at some examples of some of this, kind of flesh it out. Plus, it's interesting. So the first one, a large population. Here's why a large population matters. Let's say, this is going to sound horrible and callous. I won't use humans as an example then. I use dogs. Sorry. All right, you guys would rather use humans. All right, we'll kill off humans. So if I've got a world population that's approaching 8 billion people, it's like 7.7, 7.8 or something like that. I haven't checked worldometers lately. Um, let's say I've got 8 billion people just for a nice round number. If 50 people die today, did I likely have a significant impact on like blood type alleles? No. True, those 50 people were significant, but as far as like changing the math of these numbers, I'm like, I don't even know how many digits to the right before I'm having an impact. So if I have a huge population and 50 people die, it doesn't impact this whole Hardy-Weinberg thing much at all. What if I have a population of 100 people and 50 of them die? Like right now, if maybe, I don't know, 25% of the I alleles in the room are like little b, and then just by a chance event, all the little b people, you know how they are, they're cliquish, and so they're all hanging out together and they all die together, then all of a sudden, the car wreck or something. Again, I could have gone with dogs. You guys wanted humans. Um, yeah, obviously the dogs would wreck because they're dogs driving cars. But anyway, so all these like little b allele carrying people all die, and so now like the gene frequencies in the population changes a lot. So they kind of use these to represent alleles. White and blue. Let me switch cameras for you guys at home. There we go. So white and blue alleles are pretty common. Just eyeballing it, that looks close to 50-50-ish on the white and blue. And then I have just a few yellow ones interspersed in there. So now we might have what they call a bottleneck event. That's like you're some animal and you live on one of the Hawaiian Islands, and the Hawaiian Island is a volcano, so it erupts. So your homeland just exploded into like molten rock. So a whole lot die. The yellows were pretty rare. So what happens in the next generation? Are the yellows even there? We literally just lost an allele. Before, the white and blue were about 50-50. By some chance event, isn't it more heavily blue versus white? Now, is that because the blues versus the whites were more likely to survive the volcano? No, like that was just dumb luck, right? It's almost like any sort of explosion or something. It's not like, well, I have brown hair, so I made it, or something like that. So this is just a chance event. So they call that genetic drift. So this is mentioned in your notes. But genetic drift is when a chance event or a random occurrence, they will always use the word chance or random occurrence. When a chance event causes a population to get small, once the population is small, it probably doesn't represent the same gene frequencies as the original one. Something that was really rare might have just disappeared. So genetic drift is when a chance event makes a big population small, and now that small population is vulnerable, like they lost a lot of their genetic diversity. We can also have another version of genetic drift called the founder effect, and that's exactly what it sounds like. Pretend, lights are coming on for a second. Pretend with everybody trying to go and visit Mars and the moon and stuff like that. Pretend that we sent like 50 humans up to colonize the moon, and then we didn't let them come back. We're like, you can come back. And then once they get there, there's like a note on the moon, and we're like, suckers. And we leave them there. Is it likely that there's some genes that are really rare here that didn't make it into that group of 50? So that's the founder effect. The founder effect is when you go to a new area and your species is not there, you're now going to be like a different mix. So now those humans that colonize the moon will have like a different type of like allele frequency than we do. If everybody that's sent up was just A's and B's, like O blood type wouldn't even exist up there. If everybody had dark hair, it might be that blonde alleles were super rare, whereas here, they're much more common. So a founder effect is when you have a big population, a small chunk leaves, and now they start their own population. These two populations will now look different. So that's the first rule. Has this ever happened? Sure. You might have heard this. The most common example we always come up with is the cheetah. So cheetah have almost gone extinct twice, we think. Once was with the last ice age, and then another time. I don't really remember when. And so that means that they have little genetic diversity. They're all very, very closely related. So with humans, when I pick me versus another human, when I had that up here, I'm 99.90% genetically identical. They are more closely related. So all cheetah are like 99.95% genetically identical or 99.94 or whatever it is. They're much closer. Why is it bad for us all to be almost clones of each other if we're trying to have humans survive in the future? Why do we want genetic diversity?
So we can like swing punches in the environment. We can like adapt. If we're all the same and something kills us,
Yeah.
then we would all die.
Yeah, exactly. So I'll kind of paraphrase what James said for you guys at home. If we're all clones, if we're all the same and something's able to kill us, then it kind of takes out all of us. If it's a weakness for me and everybody else is the same, then it's a weakness for everybody. But if we're all just a little bit different, somebody can probably make it. For example, HIV. I might have mentioned this before, but a small percentage of the world's population is immune to HIV. So if we never come up with a cure and everybody was exposed to it, there's a small percentage that will survive. We'll die, so we definitely won't have any more kids. They'll survive, so they might have kids. And so now future generations will be HIV resistant. So when you have genetic diversity, somebody might be able to make it. If you have a fur coat that's thicker or thinner or light colored fur or dark colored fur, and you end up like, Pangaea and all that crap, all of a sudden your environment's different, maybe somebody will make it. So you want genetic diversity. All right. Mutations, we've talked about mutations enough. Like even just going out in the sun, UV light, we've seen this picture before, I believe, back in the cell cycle unit. I go out in the sun makes my DNA vibrate. My DNA can stick to itself. If the sun is intense enough, it can actually like make my DNA vibrate and break my DNA. If I'm near like a nuclear reactor and it melts down, that type of radiation is strong enough to just shred your DNA. UV light is strong enough to sort of like get these thymines to vibrate. They might stick. It could technically break my DNA, but then you start getting into like uranium or something like that, and that's hitting your DNA hard enough that it doesn't vibrate, it just shreds. So mutations, those just happen, partly when we're copying DNA and partly from the environment. Okay, so now we get to the interesting ones. Natural selection, we'll talk about that a lot this unit. Now let's look at selective mating. You can see why selective mating is useful, right? Let's say you're a beetle. Have you ever seen bugs like maybe you're out in the garage or something, you turn on a light and this bug runs and you got to check it out. Have you ever seen bugs that like when they're running from you, they like run and stop, run and stop, run and stop, run and stop? You want to know what the theory is behind why they stop? Because they're dumb. You're like, unintelligent? No, their brains can't process the world fast enough. So we actually think, like if I'm that beetle, when I'm stopped, I'm like, all right, there you go. I see you guys. But now, if I start moving, doesn't my brain have to process like where you guys are in space? Like, isn't this now like taking up like more RAM in my brain? What if I don't have that RAM? We think it goes blind, or we think it's like laggy, and we think it then forgets that it's supposed to be running. So it runs. It's like, oh my God, here comes a foot. It's like, oh my God, hey. Then they stop and they're like, oh my God, it's a foot. We don't know that for sure, but that's actually the current like neuroscience idea behind animals like little bugs that do that. So now imagine you're a beetle. First of all, your brain sucks so hard you can hardly like run and keep up with everything. I'm a brown beetle. How many different types of species of brown beetles are there? Yeah, it's got to be a ton. Here's a black one. Here's a brown one. This one's kind of reddish. Now, aren't I just wasting my time if I'm going around and trying to have sex with all of them? So I need to be able to figure out like, hey, that beetle's looking pretty fine. She's like, oh, that's not my species. She almost tricked me. And then I look at that beetle. I'm like, hey, that beetle's looking good. It's like, oh, wait, that's got like a little dot on its wing cover. That's a different species. So being able to like pick out your species so that you like mate with the right thing is important. All the ones that are like screwing the wrong ones and they can't have kids with them, they don't pass on those genes. So being able to select somebody like you, your same species, is important. So selective mating is important. But of course, sometimes in nature, this can go to extremes. So here's a peacock. That's a male. Why are his tail feathers so out of control big and iridescent and crazy? Like, couldn't you tame it down a little bit? Like, I'd like to be tall. Yeah, but is 9 feet necessary as a human? Like, wouldn't you just like to be, kind of tall? Like, I'd like to put on some muscle mass. Yeah, but do you want like 500 pounds of muscle mass? Like, at some point, isn't there too much? Like, so his tail feathers are huge because that's what the ladies like. She doesn't give a crap. She's like, corn, but she's supposed to care. So what happens is the females like the ones with the giant tail feathers. So they mate. The ones that have tail feathers that only have a diameter like or a radius like this big, they don't mate. And so these guys keep passing on their like crazy tail feather genes. Again, if I'm some elk or whatever, anything with like this giant rack of horns, and I'm running through the forest, like, don't I get hung up in trees and crap? Like, but the ladies want what the ladies want, right? Back when the school used to be more crowded before COVID, teachers were supposed to stand out in the hallway between classes. We do that to deter people from doing dumb stuff. So if that kid doesn't like that kid and nobody's out in the hallways, this kid might punch that kid. But if there's like two teachers nearby, you're less likely to do that. So we're supposed to stand out in the hallways between classes. So I'd stand out in the hallways between classes, and every once in a while I could see an example of this, and it was awesome. There'd be like 5 freshman boys, and they'll hang out over here. You know how some people kind of hang out in like the little lab cubbies where the doors are, 'cause you're trying to get out of the way. So you're doing it to be, courteous. They hang out in the lab cubbies. So there'd be like these 5 boys, and they're all standing here like this. They got their backpacks on, so they're all standing like that, talking or whatever. And they're ninth grade boys, so they're always like messing with each other, like hey, or whatever. And you're like, don't like. So I was a ninth grade boy once, and I'm an immature old man. So they're standing like this, and then all of a sudden they're like standing talking, and you see this one boy go like this. You see somebody they thinks is attractive. So there's this girl walking by. As soon as he sees her, like this, his friends see him. Yeah, blah 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 blah. This girl walks by, and they're all like this. She makes it back by. Nobody says anything. It was just completely natural, and it cracks me up. So that's what's happening. He's flexing. It's not really working on her, like I said, but this is selective mating. So over time, the reason that this happens is she mates with the ones with the brightest tail feathers, deer, or elk or whatever, the ones with the biggest horns. Rams, they just beat each other's heads together, and whoever is like conscious gets to mate. And so they end up with these giant horns and stuff. So that's how selective mating works. So overall, it could mean that you're the fittest. Like if you're a ram and you basically beat up all the other rams, then if I'm a female, it's like I want to mate with that one because he'll have strong kids. They can fend for themselves. They can get food. Nobody's going to take their food. Like that kind of makes sense. But sometimes it backfires. Usually when man is involved. So over here we have the Australian jewel beetle, also called the Australian golden beetle. And it does have a particular like genus and species. I think I wrote it, maybe it's in the next picture. So if you wanted to look it up, if you look up Australian jewel beetle, you don't find anything. You actually have to like look up the species. So after I tell you the story, I'll like show you the species in case you wanted to Google this. So there's this Australian jewel beetle, and he's obviously found in Australia. And this one's a boy because of that. All right, now, out in Australia, it's kind of wide open. Lights are coming on. So here's Australia, obviously. And these beetles lived in a certain part. I don't remember if it's north, south, whatever. So I'll just say that their kind of habitat, their niche is sort of up in here. All right, so that's kind of where their population is. And so out in Australia, they're like, all right, we got to build some roads. So they build a road through the middle of this. Obviously, we think that's going to impact the beetle population. So we're watching the beetle population. It's been pretty steady for years. This is a true story. And I remember, I think it was my environmental biology professor in college told us this story, and I was just shocked. So the population's been pretty steady for many years, and so this is beetle population in like number, and this over here would be like time in years. And here's the name of my graph. So we build a road through there. We assume the population is going to fall. Some beetles may be like if the road was black asphalt or something, then it like absorbs sun during the day and it's warm at night. So some of the beetles might be attracted to it because it's warm at night. Some places around the world this happens. There'll be some animal. You know how deserts famously they'll get like really hot during the day, but then they get really cold at night. You build a road through a warm place, and then when it gets cold at night, the animals will like go and hang out on the road because the road's warm, and then they get run over. So we thought that maybe that would happen with the beetles. So we thought there'd be kind of a population drop. But then we thought it would like recover, and it might not be exactly where it was before because we destroyed part of their habitat, but we thought it'd be like close to normal. That's not what happens. It starts going like this. Like they might go extinct in 2 generations. You're like, oh my gosh, that's crazy. Now, I don't know if that's a big deal. They're beetles, but like that's kind of crazy. All from building a road. And you're like, okay, well, is it like they sleep over here, but they eat over here, so they're always crossing the road? No, wasn't that. So they start trying to figure out why it is. Well, it turns out these beetles are highly selective when they pick their mates. And different from a lot of animals out in the animal kingdom, usually the females select the males. So the males always show off, and then the females are like, you. That's generally how it works. Not all the time, but often. With beetles, it's the opposite. So the males select the females. So the first thing they look for is the right color, that kind of gold color. But it turns out in Australia, there's more than one beetle that has that gold coloring. So the second thing they look for are dimples. Do you see how their wing covers? There's wings under there. Do you see how their wing covers kind of have these little dimples on them? They aren't smooth like, say, a regular beetle that we're used to seeing. So they look for dimples. Once they've got gold and dimples, that's narrowed it down. That's the right species. There's only one that meets the criteria of gold and dimples. So now, how do you select? Let's say that you find 10 ladies with gold coloring and dimples. Which one would you prefer to mate with? They go for the biggest one. So the larger the size, the more attracted they are to the female. So gold, dimples, and large. So when they built this road through here, sometimes Aussies drink. And sometimes they drink and drive. And I know not everywhere in Australia, but I imagine a lot of roads in Australia, it's just sort of like a path. I don't know that that's true. This is a stereotype, but I'm sort of like, let's say you go off the road, you're really just in like other dirt. It's not like here you go off the road and you like get in some channel and you like flip and roll and die, or you hit a wall or something. Like out there, it's just like, it's not like walking down the hallway. It's like I'm on the road. Now I'm not. Now I'm back on. So they're drinking and driving, and they're throwing their beer bottles out the window. What color are a lot of beer bottles?
I guess goldish brown.
Aren't they similar to that color? Kind of. This is more coppery, but kind of goldish brown. When you think of bottles like IBC like root beer bottles, don't a lot of them have dimples around like that bottom inch of the bottle? So they're the right color. They got dimples. How big is a beer bottle compared to a female jewel beetle? So what were all the males doing? They were trying to have relations with bottles. So you're like, Mr. Cotton, do you have pictures of this? Of course. So here he is. And there they are. You're like, are they not aware that there's like another dude next door? Guess not. Now, I can't find it anymore, but there's a video somewhere out there on the web. I don't know if it's just like it's gone from existence, but I saw it many, many years ago. I should have downloaded it, and I didn't. But they show a video of this, and cleverly, they put a microphone up next to the beer bottles. And remember how I said I know this is a male because of that? That's actually hard. And so they put a microphone up there, and all you hear is this. There's like 15 beetles on there, and you're like, what's making that tapping sound? And you're like, oh. So out in nature, typically it works fine. Now you don't mate with the incorrect species, but sometimes it backfires. You're like, so Mr. Cotton, what happened? Did the beetles go extinct? No. Did they launch an anti-drinking and driving program or an anti-littering program? No. They went to the beer company and they said, hey, you know those dimples on the bottles? Don't do that. Can you smooth that out? And they're like, sure. That fixed the problem. Now the Aussies, they drink and drive, throw their beer bottles out the windows. The males would be like, oh, look at that. And they're like, that's just a bottle. Almost had sex with that. I looked like a friggin' idiot. Fix the problem. Told you Hardy-Weinberg got better. All right. Let me make sure I've got volume for this. Okay. So this one, you need the music because the music is a perfect fit. Every once in a while you see a movie or whatever, and like whatever is happening in the movie, the music like perfectly fits along with it. You're like, good choice. That's how this goes. So does anybody know what these birds are called? Blue-footed boobies. And where are they found? Not Australia. That's a good guess because all kinds of weird things are found in Australia. Where was it that Darwin went and saw the Galapagos Islands? So they're native to the Galapagos, and they're obviously they're blue-footed, and I don't know what the booby is, but in this one, the female selects the male, and so the male does three things to attract a female. First, he wants her to make sure that she knows he's the same species. So he walks up, and when he's trying to impress the female, he does this. Let me flip back over to this screen for a second. So he walks up and he shows off his feet by lifting them up. He walks up and he's like, I have blue feet. You have blue feet. We have blue feet. I'm just saying. Then the next thing he does is he flexes. They call it pointing. So he throws his shoulders forward. He points his butt up to the sky and his beak up to the sky like this. Then the last thing that he does is he shows her that he can build her a home. So he starts picking up nest building supplies. So he'll pick up a stick and he'll hold it in his beak because he doesn't have arms. So he'll pick up a stick and he'll be like, look at the stick. Nice stick. Piece of yarn that is soft and fluffy on the body. Here's another stick. What do you think of that? And so he just rotates through, showing off his feet and pointing and picking up sticks. And if she's impressed, then they go and make babies. And if not, then he basically just tries it on another female. So that's what we're going to see. All right. So I'll try taking my earpiece out and holding it to the microphone, but after about a minute, it turns off. So I have to kind of keep like putting it in my ear and then doing that. It somehow knows whether it's in my ear or not. I don't know how. Like if I set it down, it goes to sleep after a minute also. All right, so here we go. So that's the male. Okay, so this is the female. The females are usually larger in this species. And so the first thing he's actually going to do is he's going to start off with the point. Bad move in my opinion. I would always start off with the blue feet, but he goes for the point. He goes straight for the point. So he points. Now he shows off his feet. Now, if she's interested, she kind of follows his cadence. So if he gets like a rhythm like this, if she likes him, the higher her feet go and the more in sync their timing is, the more that she likes him. It's like a dance. He's picking up some building supplies. If she likes the building supplies, then she'll mirror him as he holds it up and he's like, look at this nice stick. And she's like, yeah, that's a great stick. And he'll pick up a piece of yarn. Look at this yarn. She's like, that's great yarn. So she'll like kind of like, they'll go like beak to beak if she likes him. Looked promising in the beginning, but after that, she was unimpressed. So this is another one. Obviously, we're just doing this for fun now. Like you understand selective mating and such. This is off of the, gosh, I get them all mixed up. Life, Earth, the BBC series. They come out with like 1 and 2 and stuff like that. So there's different versions, by the way. If you were to ever buy or rent or whatever one of the BBC, that's like the British version of National Geographic, basically. If you ever rent those, you want to get the European version. The European version has David Attenborough. He's that famous naturalist that you hear his voice. He's that British guy that, like, anytime somebody's like making fun of like a science documentary and they come in with the British voice, they're talking about David Attenborough. He has that very like soothing. He's like the Bob Ross of like biology videos. For us Americans, they think that we don't like David Attenborough, so they get us like a pop culture icon. So they'll hire like Brad Pitt to read the script. But David Attenborough writes his own scripts, and his are good because he's a scientist. So they'll get somebody else for us, and they'll be like, well, don't get too sciencey. They're Americans. They just want to see like pretty animals. And so like when you compare the scripts, the David Attenborough stuff is like very educational and interesting, and you learn stuff. The ones for Americans is like, hey, look at that bird. Pretty cool. Look at that bird. So this one is, I think the guy that's narrating is the Darth Vader voice guy, James Earl Jones. So incredible voice, but the script they give him is for us dumb Americans. So it's not quite as good as David Attenborough.
This contender, called the Superb Bird of Paradise, is a magician with a special trick. First, he advertises his show, calling to attract the female. And then, the audience in place begins working his magic. Now that's impressive. But she needs to step out for a moment to think.
So you're wondering, like, wait, where did his head go? Where did this green mouth-looking structure come from? All of that. So I paused it just slightly too early. His mouth on the inside is white, kind of like a cottonmouth snake. They call them cottonmouths because when they open up the inside of their mouths, a water moccasin is a cottonmouth because they have like really bright inside of their mouth. So he's going to chirp in a second, but he's got his wings pulled forward, almost like a lion's mane pulled forward, and his head is right here. So his beak is sitting up, and he's going to like chirp, and you'll see him open his mouth. So now you can see him from the side. That's his head. All this is feathers that are just like pulled forward.
Oh boy. Well, not
Somebody said, when are we going to see a success story? Um, lights are coming on. I'm going to need you to sign a waiver first before I can show success stories. Just kidding. So anyway, selective mating. Why do males do all the crazy things that males do? Selective mating. So like I was saying, you can see the same behaviors in humans. Like when I was given the example of the freshman boys and the pretty girl walks by and they all try to look big. Flip through a part in the yearbook and look at the team. You know, they all like that. I'm holding my breath. Take the freaking picture. Can't stay looking this big for long. Um, so we do a lot of the same things as humans. It just, we think at least, a little bit more subtle. So Hardy-Weinberg. Any questions or comments on that stuff before we move on to the math part of it? There was like a palpable sense of like let down just then. I said, before we move on to the math, and they're like, all right. Glad you liked it. And if you were, I had said that I had the species. I should have like a yellow box on one of these. Is it this one? Or did I mention it at all in the notes? Okay. If anybody was curious, well, then I might think you're weird. But if you're curious, I can find that species. I do have it somewhere. So if you're trying to like Google this whole Australian jewel beetle or Australian golden beetle thing, but if you Google Australian jewel beetle, you get very little. You have to like Google the species to find like the original document, the original like science journal article about it. But pretty crazy. All right. So the next thing we want to do is some Hardy-Weinberg math. All right. So Hardy-Weinberg math. It used to be that every single year, this was the guarantee, like they always ask Hardy-Weinberg math problems. And so I would tell my students every year, I've been teaching AP Bio since the fall of 2001. And we went until about 5 years ago was the first time some students came in after the AP Bio test and they're like, Mr. Cotton, there was no Hardy-Weinberg on that test. And I remember telling this student, I said, you're wrong. And then like another student came in and there was like, Mr. Cotton, there was no Hardy-Weinberg on that test. And I'm like, really? And then like a third student came in, they're like, there was no Hardy-Weinberg on that test. So about 5 years ago, there was this one test where they suddenly didn't have Hardy-Weinberg. But one of the like common jokes, sort of like mitochondria is powerhouse of the cell. One of the common jokes in AP biology amongst teachers is like something along the lines of like, well, why not? Well, because of Hardy-Weinberg type of thing. It was a guarantee. So in all of my years teaching, once students have come back and said there was no Hardy-Weinberg. Every other year, they're like, yeah, it was on there. Sometimes it's like one question, not that big a deal. And other times it'll like show up on the essay and now it's worth more. So it's kind of a gamble with Hardy-Weinberg. Sometimes it's big, sometimes it's small. And it'll be like small, 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 and then it hits. So typically it's not too big of a deal, but every once in a while it's a really big deal. So here's how Hardy-Weinberg math works. We got this equation. Let me switch over to this camera. And I don't know why they use these particular letters, but they do. P plus Q equals 1. If you're following along in your notes, on page 2, for you guys, it's like just page 1 on the right. You'll see these equations at the very top of the page. Those are the two Hardy-Weinberg equations. So on your very front page, but it's like the right-hand side, are the Hardy-Weinberg equations. And they give you the Hardy-Weinberg equations, so you don't have to memorize them. But look at them kind of closely, because back in the day, they didn't give you any equations on the AP Bio test. They'd just be like, solve this. And you're like, can I use a calculator? And they're like, no. And you're like, can you give me the equation? They're like, no. And you're like, okay, it's cool. What do you notice about those two equations? Like when I compare that one to that one, there should be something from like your Algebra 1 days that kind of stands out. Like pretend that you did have to memorize them. Is there some way? You're like, oh, I just memorized this, and then here's how I get the other one.
The second one is the first one squared.
Yeah, the second one is just the first one squared. So remember back in the days of FOIL, first, outer, inner, last? So if I had this, if I just squared the first one, squared everything over there, and squared everything over there, I get the second equation. I'd have P plus Q times P plus Q equals 1 squared. And then I first outer plus inner plus last. If you did the box method, then you know you like box, 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 or whatever it is, and you get that equals 1. So the reason I tell you this, on the real AP Bio test, they give you a formula sheet. But let's say you got to flip back to the beginning of your little booklet and look for a formula. Does that burn like 5 or 6 seconds? You've taken AP Bio tests, or you've taken AP tests before, some of you guys. Does 5 or 6 seconds matter sometimes? Yeah. Now, if you're one of the faster students, it doesn't matter. But for the average student, if you take like 3 or 4 AP exams, you're going to come out of a couple of them like, I didn't finish, or I got super rushed. So yeah, I finished, but like I didn't even read the last 3 multiple choice or something. So a few seconds matters. In addition, if you go on to major in biology in college, they generally don't give you formula sheets for many things. So that's how you could just sort of remember the formulas. As long as I can remember P plus Q equals 1, then I remember, oh yeah, the other one was just I square all that crap. So I've got these two formulas. Okay, so what do they represent and what do I actually do with them? All right, so to me, math is interesting, but math is more interesting when it relates to like biology. So P represents the dominant allele. So maybe like whatever, capital A, the dominant allele. What would Q probably represent then? Yeah, the recessive allele. Okay, now, why do you think it's true that P plus Q equals 1? What's that representing? Like, why is that a true? 100%. Yeah, that 1 represents 100%. If you want to think of it this way, 1.00. You know how if like I got a 10 out of 10 on a quiz and I type that into my calculator to see what my percentages, first of all, what's wrong with you? Let's say that you did. It would say, you know, if I keep all the decimals, it would say 1.00. So this is just what they call a frequency. This is a percentage, 100%, 70%. But a lot of times in math, they don't speak in percentages, they speak in frequencies. So the frequency is 1.00 or 0.70. Frequency just means it's the decimal version instead of the percent version. So P plus Q equals 100 because if I went around the room and I was looking at these alleles for everybody, let's say that one of you guys is big A, big A. So I'm just going down the row, you know, like big A, big A, big A, little a, whatever. As we go around the room, in the end, won't all the big A's and all the little A's added together equal 100% of the A's? Yeah, so that's why. All the big A's and all the little A's add up to 100% of the A's. So that's why that equation is true. Okay. Well, what do you think? So P represents the dominant allele, like maybe A. Q represents the recessive. What do you think P squared represents? What does P represent? Big A. So what would P squared represent? Yeah, big A, big A. So that's homozygous dominant. What would Q squared represent? Little a, homozygous recessive. Now here's the part that's kind of tricky. What would you think I would use to represent big A, little a? What would you have thought? Yeah, you're like, well, it's 2PQ. I would have thought, you're ahead of me then. I would have thought, well, if big A is P and little a is Q, then I would have thought it's just PQ. But according to the formula, it's 2PQ. Why is that? Why is it not just plain old PQ? I can't just be like, well, FOIL said so. I don't just FOIL crap and it's true. I don't like my salary. FOIL it. Okay, it's great now. Why is it two sets? So I do have two sets. You're right. Why is it logical that there'd be two sets?
With like Punnett squares, when you do like big A, little a, there's two.
When I do Punnett squares, there's two of them. Couldn't I be like, okay, so if I draw a big A and a big A, that's P squared. A little a and a little a, that's Q squared. But for this one, couldn't I basically draw a big A from dad and a little a from mom? And then like, or a little a from dad and a big A from mom. So there's two different possibilities. I could be big A, little a, or little a, big A. So that's why it's 2PQ. If you want to think of it like the Punnett square analogy, all right, for every one of these, for every one of those, I have one of these, and then I have two of the heterozygotes. So I have a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio. I have one of these for every two of these for every one of these. And that will add up to all of the genotypes. So that's why that equals 1. So that's how the equation works. Okay, and I know that's the part that I always hated when I was a student. I'd be in math class, and the professor, my teacher in high school, would be explaining why the equation works. Well, like, here's how we derive the equation. I'm like, just give me the equation. Let me solve the problems. So, but that's why it works. Okay, so now here's what's interesting about Hardy-Weinberg. Usually in math, if I were to give you like 5 unknowns, oops, I ran out. If I was like W plus X plus Y plus Z plus V equals 1, and I was like, solve for X, I would have to give you W and Y and Z and V, or at least another problem to where you could eventually solve for those other 4. Here's what's cool about Hardy-Weinberg. If something's in Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium, if I give you one of these, you can solve for everything else. There are 5 unknowns up here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. if I give you just this one, you can tell me what all the others are. So I could give you, all right, little a is 30%. I can then tell you what big A is, and big A, and big A, and little a. So it's like math, only better. I give you one unknown, and then I can produce 4 answers. Normally in math, it's the other way around. You have to give me all the stuff, and I can only produce one. So let's give it a shot. Down at the bottom of your notes, if you're online, it's page 2. If you're in person, it's at the bottom right of your front page. There's this like A, B, C, D, E sample problem. Give that a shot. I'm going to pull it up on my screen up here. I want to see if you can figure it out. So usually math teachers like give you formulas, they work a problem, and then they have you try. I'm not working a problem first. I just want to see if you can figure it out. So for you guys at home, give me 1 second here, and I'm going to pull it up on the screen. Oops, I went into the wrong folder there. I don't want pictures. I want notes. Don't crash. Okay. All right, let me sling this over to that screen. Okay. And then put you guys on that camera. Sorry, that camera. I'll give you a little bit longer to see if you can figure it out. Math is kind of like the range of student abilities in a classroom is always greatest when it comes to math. Any difference between my highest and my lowest students in, say, history or something in here, that gap is smaller than math, because math has been building for like, 10, 11, 12 years for you guys. So if math is a weak subject, it was weak, and then the next year it was weak, and the next year it was weak. You have 12 years of like falling behind, or you have 12 years of like excelling at it. So the highest and the lowest students in math is probably the biggest gap in most high school classes. So for some of you guys, it's a piece of cake. For some of you guys, you're like, I don't know how to start. Either way, you'll be fine once we're done. All right, I'm going to help you guys on part A, and then I'm going to see if you can move on to B and C. Some of y'all might be on D or E right now. That's fine. So if you need to ignore me because you're cruising along, that's fine. If you're stuck, then that's why I'm going to walk you through it. So it says a certain population of cats is represented by 9% homozygous recessive cats with white fur. Okay, so as far as working Hardy-Weinberg problems, the place where it gets tricky for people is if they don't label the right thing. Like we're going to always give you one piece of information, like 9% homozygous recessive cats. So I've got option 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Which of those, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which one of those is homozygous recessive? 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5? Yeah, number 5. So that means Q squared is 9%. How do I write 9% as a decimal? Because everything up here is in decimal form. 0.09, yeah, 0.09. So Q squared is 0.09, or I'm going to get rid of the leading zero. I'll just say, I'll make sure that my decimal is big enough. 0.09. Okay, So if I'm just in math class and I have q squared equals 0.09, can I solve for q? Yeah, how do I solve for q? Yeah, I just square root both sides. So be careful here. What is the square root of 0.09? 0.3. It's not 0.03. It might feel like it's 0.03, but that feeling is wrong. I can show you, because 0.3 times 0.3 gives me 0.09. The way the decimal's moving works out. If I did 0.03, then now I've got like too many decimal places. That would end up being like 0.0009. So it is 0.3. You do get a calculator. So the version of AP Biology test that you guys take, you do get a calculator, like the 2021 version. So you can always double check yourself on a calculator. But if Q is 0.3, so that means little a is, oh, hey, 0.3. Q squared, little a, we said was 0.09. Well, if Q is 0.3, what does P have to be? Yeah, P plus 0.3 has to add up to 1, so P has to be 0.7. All right, well, if P is 0.7, can't I figure out P squared? Sure, so 0.7 squared is 49. All right, once I know P and Q, can't I figure out 2 times P times Q? Don't forget to multiply by the 2. Sure. So now I have 2 times P times Q. 3 times 7 is 21, times 2 is 42. So I actually know all of these now. Q squared was my original 9%, my 0.09, and now I know everybody else. So they're like, what's big A? 0.7. What's big A? 49. What's little a? Well, they gave us that. I'm sorry, big A, 42. So I was only given one thing, and now I can solve all the other ones. What's weird about Hardy-Weinberg is you never like solve the whole equation. You know how normally in math you get all this crap and you come down to like one final answer? You end up just solving bits and pieces. You never like solve the whole thing. You just solve that piece and that piece and that piece. That's what's different about it. So back over here, and then we'll watch TCTV. So what percentage of the alleles is recessive? So recessive alleles, that'd be this guy, 0.3 frequency. And it said percentage, so I changed that to be 30%. So 30% for A. What percentage of the alleles present is dominant? Well, that'd be 0.7 frequency, or 70%. That's the dominant allele. What about homozygous dominant? Homozygous dominant? That's big A, P squared, which is 49%. What percentage is heterozygous? 42%. Now, there's 2 ways to answer this. I mean, they're the same answer. What percentage is brown? So what percentage is brown? 91. How did you get there? There's 2 ways to get there. Yeah, if 9% are white, and this is the first time that you've introduced another color, apparently 91% of them must be brown, right? In addition, if brown's dominant, wouldn't that mean that like big A is brown and big A little a is brown? 49 plus 42 adds up to 91. So it works this way too. So either way, you're getting the same answer. All right. I think that's it for now. Let me take roll really fast and throw on some TCTV. And let me take a roll before you guys check out of here.